Declassified, Northern France, October 1943. The German reconnaissance patrol moves through the abandoned farmland like ghosts themselves. 42 scouts from the Wehrmacht's elite Aufklärungsabteilung, men hardened by 3 years of continental warfare. They've been hunting resistance cells for 6 months. They've lost count of how many they've captured, how many they've eliminated. These men don't make mistakes. They don't walk into traps. They are the trappers, not the trapped. But tonight, they have no idea they are being stalked by something they've never encountered before. A lone predator who shouldn't exist in their calculations. Someone who learned to read terrain before she learned to read books. Someone who understood animal behavior so intimately that she could predict human movement with terrifying accuracy. Someone the locals would come to call La Fantôme de la Ferme, the farm ghost. She watches them now from a position that breaks every rule of military doctrine: too close, too exposed, too confident. But she isn't military. She never went to staff college. She never studied von Clausewitz or studied tactical theory at Sincere. She learned warfare the same way she learned everything else, by watching, by patience, by understanding that predator and prey follow patterns as old as time itself. The patrol approaches the bait, an abandoned supply truck positioned with such casual carelessness that it screams authenticity. Wehrmacht rations scattered nearby fresh tire tracks leading north. Every detail calculated to tell a story the Germans want to believe. Resistance fighters interrupted mid-resupply, fled in panic, left everything behind. 42 of Germany's finest scouts are about to walk into an ambush designed by a 19-year-old farm girl who never fired a weapon before the occupation. Her name was Marie Rousseau, and by the time the sun rose the next morning, she would hold a record that would never be equaled in the entire history of irregular warfare: the successful deception and ambush of the largest enemy patrol by a single operative working alone. The question that would haunt German intelligence for the remainder of the war was brutally simple. How did a girl who spent her childhood herding cattle become the deadliest architect of human traps the resistance had ever produced? The answer begins not in the chaos of occupied France, but in the quiet rhythms of a life that should have never intersected with war at all. Marie Rousseau was born in 1924 to a cattle farming family outside the village of Saint-Marc-du-Mont in Normandy, the third of 5 children. Unremarkable in almost every way, except one. She possessed an uncanny ability to predict where animals would move before they moved. Her father noticed it first when she was barely 7 years old. Whilst other children chased cattle with sticks and shouting, Marie simply positioned herself where the animal would run, waiting with patience that seemed impossible for a child she didn't chase. She understood. By the time she was 14, she was managing the entire farm's livestock movements alone. She could read a cow's body language from 200 meters and know whether it would bolt left or right. She could predict where foxes would enter the chicken coops by studying their previous attempts and understanding their tactical evolution. She didn't just see animals, she saw patterns, she saw behavior, she saw the invisible lines that connected intention to action. When Germany invaded in 1940, the Rousseau farm fell under occupation control like everything else in northern France. Marie was 16. Her brothers were conscripted into labour battalions. Her father grew silent and grey, but Marie watched. She watched how the German patrols moved through the countryside. She watched their timing, their routes, their patterns. She watched the way they reacted to resistance activity, the way they adapted their tactics. The way they thought. She saw immediately what others took months to realise. The Germans moved like predators, but they moved like predators who had never been prey. They expected fear. They expected chaos. They expected the occupied population to scatter like livestock. And because they expected it, they had become predictable. Marie didn't join the resistance through ideology or patriotism or rage. She joined because a resistance courier named Thomas Mercier stopped at the farm in late 1942. Exhausted and wounded, needing a place to hide, she fed him. She bandaged him, and when he asked what he could do to repay her, she said something that changed everything. "Teach me how you move. Teach me how they hunt you." Mercier was a veteran operative, careful and paranoid and still alive because of it. He taught Marie the basics of fieldcraft, dead drops, surveillance. But within 3 weeks, something extraordinary happened. Marie started teaching him. She showed him how German patrols used the same trails cattle used because they offered the easiest paths. She demonstrated how scout movements could be predicted by understanding which terrain features offered the best sightlines. She explained that humans, like animals, telegraphed their intentions through dozens of micro-behaviors most people never noticed. Mercier brought her into the network. But he made a critical mistake, the same mistake everyone makes when they're skilled at something. He assumed Marie would follow established resistance doctrine. He assumed she would learn their methods, their tactics, their rules. Instead, she nearly got them all killed within a month. August 1943, Marie's first independent operation. Mercier had given her explicit instructions. Observe the German patrol route through the valley. Count the soldiers. Report back basic reconnaissance. 0 risk. A test run for the new recruit. Marie didn't just observe. She decided the patrol route was inefficient and that she could force them onto a better ambush path by leaving false evidence of resistance activity on their current route. She created an elaborate trail of breadcrumbs, a spent British cigarette here, a scrap of marked map there, boot prints leading toward the village. She didn't tell Mercier. She didn't tell anyone. She just did it. The German patrol took the bait. They followed Marie's trail exactly as she predicted, but they called in reinforcements. Suddenly, instead of 12 soldiers, there were 40, and they were heading straight toward the village where the resistance cell was actually hiding. Mercier found out when he saw the German column moving. He barely evacuated the safe house in time. 3 minutes later, the building was surrounded. If they'd been there, the entire cell would have been captured or killed. When Mercier confronted Marie, he was incandescent with rage. She'd violated every protocol, she'd acted without authorization. She'd nearly destroyed everything. He brought her before the cell commander, a former French army captain named Dubois, expecting severe punishment, possibly expulsion, possibly worse. Dubois listened to Mercier's furious account. Then he turned to Marie, this 18-year-old farm girl who'd been in the resistance for 4 weeks, and asked a single question. "Did you know they would call reinforcements?" Marie thought about it. Then she said, "Yes, but I didn't know you'd left people in the village. I thought you were all in the farmhouse network to the east. If you'd been where I thought you were, I would have led them into the perfect ambush site." Dubois studied her for a long moment. Then he asked, "Show me the ambush site you had in mind." Marie took them to a narrow lane between 2 hedgerows, invisible from both ends, with clear escape routes and perfect fields of fire. Mercier, despite his anger, recognized it immediately as the best natural ambush point in the entire operational area. A location their cell had somehow overlooked for 18 months, Dubois made a decision that would change the course of the resistance network's effectiveness. He didn't expel Marie. He didn't reprimand her. Instead, he said something that became legendary in the post-war accounts. "Don't teach her our doctrine. Let her teach us hers." From that moment forward, Marie Rousseau stopped being a recruit and became something unprecedented. A tactical architect who designed ambushes the way most people designed gardens. Her first official operation came in September 1943. German intelligence had been tightening their anti-resistance operations. Patrols had become more aggressive, more unpredictable, more dangerous. The resistance was losing ground. Dubois gave Marie an impossible assignment: create a deception operation that would draw out a significant German force and allow the resistance to ambush them with minimal risk. Marie spent 3 weeks preparing. She didn't study German tactics from books or stolen manuals. She watched them. She learned their patterns the same way she'd learned cattle patterns. She identified their assumptions, their expectations, their psychological triggers. Germans expected resistance fighters to be desperate, reactive, chaotic. They expected ambushes to be crude, a roadblock, some gunfire, dead Germans, fleeing partisans. They'd seen it 100 times. They knew how to counter it. So Marie designed something they'd never seen before. Something that exploited not their tactical weaknesses, but their psychological certainties. She found an abandoned Wehrmacht supply lorry from a previous skirmish. She had it repaired just enough to look operational. She positioned it in an open field with clear approaches from multiple directions. Exactly the kind of position genuine resistance fighters would never choose because it was too exposed. She scattered fresh rations around it. She created tyre tracks leading north toward known resistance territory. She left a single British rifle, damaged but identifiable, half buried in mud. Every detail told the same story. Resistance fighters had ambushed a supply truck, grabbed what they could carry, fled in panic when they heard reinforcements coming. The truck was too heavy to move. They'd left everything, and they'd gone north. But here's what made it brilliant. Marie positioned the truck in a location where German scouts would find it naturally during their patrol route. She didn't make it obvious. She made it inevitable. She understood that Germans trusted their own reconnaissance more than any intelligence report. If they found it themselves, they'd believe it completely. The morning of October 12, 1943, a German reconnaissance patrol discovered the abandoned truck exactly as Marie predicted. They called it in. Intelligence officers analysed the scene. Everything checked out. The story was too consistent, too detailed, too authentic to be a deception. They made the decision Marie had gambled on. They dispatched a large scout force to track the resistance fighters north. Before they could escape the area, 42 men from the Aufklärungsabteilung, the best they had. Men who'd hunted partisans across occupied Europe. Marie had prepared for them not where the false trail led, but where they would actually go. Because she understood something about predators. They don't follow prey, they predict where prey will be and get there first. She knew the scouts would send an advance element up the false trail whilst the main force moved to cut off the expected escape routes. She knew they'd position themselves in the terrain that offered the best tactical advantage, a sunken road with high embankments that provided cover and overlook. She knew this because it's exactly where she would have gone. It's where any intelligent predator would go. The sunken road had one feature the Germans hadn't noticed because they were thinking like soldiers, not like someone who'd spent her childhood in these fields. A collapsed drainage culvert that ran beneath the road, large enough for a person to crawl through, invisible. Unless you knew where to look, Marie went through that culvert the night before with 4 other resistance fighters. They positioned themselves in the embankments above the sunken road. Hidden in positions that would have been impossible to reach during the day, they waited. When the German scouts moved into position at dawn, they walked into an ambush that violated every principle of partisan warfare. There was no shooting. There was no violence. There was only Marie's voice, amplified by the acoustic properties of the sunken road, speaking in perfect German. You are surrounded. Your main patrol is being engaged 2 kilometers north. Reinforcements cannot reach you. Put down your weapons. It was a bluff. The main patrol wasn't being engaged. There were no reinforcements. Marie had 5 people, not 50. But the Germans didn't know that. They heard her voice echoing from multiple directions. Distorted by the terrain, they saw movement in the embankments. They had no radio contact because the sunken road was a dead zone, and they made the calculation Marie had predicted. Better to surrender to partisans and be taken prisoner than to fight and die in an ambush with no support coming. 42 German scouts surrendered to a 19-year-old farm girl who'd been in the resistance for 14 months. The aftermath was chaos. Resistance command couldn't believe it. German intelligence was convinced it had been a full battalion-strength operation. The scouts themselves reported facing overwhelming force in prepared positions. Marie's own cell members didn't understand what had happened until she walked them through every step of the psychological deception. She hadn't trapped soldiers, she'd trapped assumptions. The operation sent shockwaves through both sides. The Germans became paranoid about every abandoned vehicle, every scattered supply cache. Their reconnaissance forces became slower, more cautious, less effective. Resistance intelligence reported that German patrol doctrine in northern France was completely revised following what they called the Sainte-Marie incident. But Marie's achievement went beyond tactical victory. She'd done something unprecedented in irregular warfare. She'd successfully predicted and manipulated the behavior of a large enemy force without firing a shot, without losing a single partisan, without the enemy even knowing they'd been deceived until it was too late. In the post-war analysis of resistance operations, historians struggle to find any comparable achievement. Individual operatives had successfully deceived larger forces, but never through such elaborate psychological manipulation, never with such perfect prediction of enemy behavior, never with such complete control of the tactical narrative. Allied intelligence interviewed Marie in 1944 after the liberation. They wanted to understand her methodology, to incorporate it into training doctrine. But Marie couldn't really explain it in military terms. She kept reverting to farming metaphors. You don't chase cattle where you want them to go. You make them think they want to go there. You don't trap foxes by scaring them. You make them feel safe in the wrong place. One SOE officer wrote in his report, Miss Rousseau possesses an intuitive understanding of human behavioral patterns that defies conventional tactical training. She thinks like prey and predator simultaneously. Attempts to systematize her approach into doctrine have failed because her genius lies not in technique but in perception. The 42 Scout ambush remained Marie's masterpiece, but it wasn't her last operation. She continued working with the resistance until liberation, designing increasingly sophisticated deceptions. German forces in her operational area became so paranoid that they stopped trusting their own reconnaissance, which may have been her greatest achievement. She'd convinced an enemy that their own eyes deceived them. After liberation, Marie returned to the farm. She refused all military decorations. She declined interviews. She married a local teacher in 1946 and spent the next 40 years raising cattle and children with the same quiet competence she'd brought to everything else. She died in 1986, aged 62, of a heart attack whilst herding cattle in the same fields where she'd once herded German soldiers into impossible traps. The local papers ran brief obituaries mentioning her service with the resistance. None of them mentioned the record. None of them explained that she'd accomplished something no military academy had ever trained for, and no tactical doctrine had ever anticipated the record stands. The largest enemy force successfully ambushed through solo psychological deception in the history of irregular warfare. 42 professional soldiers trapped by a farm girl who understood that humans, like animals, move in patterns. That fear and confidence are tools like any other, but the best trap is the one prey walks into willingly. In the Museum of Resistance History in Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, there's a small display about Marie Rousseau. It includes her handwritten operations notes, characteristically brief. Position truck in Field 7. Germans will find it Tuesday morning. They will call scouts. Scouts will go to Sunken Road because it's where I'd go. We'll be waiting. No tactical jargon. No military theory. Just a farm girl who saw patterns where others saw chaos, who understood that the deadliest weapon isn't the one you fire, but the one you make your enemy point at themselves. The record will never be broken, because warfare has changed. Modern reconnaissance uses satellites and drones and thermal imaging. Soldiers don't walk into sunken roads anymore. They don't trust abandoned trucks. They don't make assumptions based on cigarette butts and tire tracks. But in October 1943, for one perfect operation, a 19-year-old who learned tactical theory by watching cattle graze did something that military professionals still study and struggle to explain. She made 42 experienced soldiers surrender to a ghost. Marie Rousseau never called herself a tactician or a strategist or a warrior. When her grandchildren asked about the war, she'd shrug and say she did what needed doing, same as everyone else. But the German intelligence reports tell a different story. They called her die Bauernmädchen-Falle, the farm girl trap, and they warned their scouts in language that would have made Marie smile to watch for patterns that seemed too natural, trails that felt too obvious, and abandoned trucks in fields where cattle used to graze. Because the girl who herded cattle had learned something the German army never quite understood. Predators are most vulnerable when they're hunting, and the best place to trap a hunter is exactly where they think they're safest,